Today I'm talking with an old friend about ministry in Chicago and what it was like in the 1970s when I first came here. A 40th anniversary interview next on Significant Insights. Hello, welcome to the program. Good to have you. This year we're celebrating, are you ready for this? The 40th anniversary of our ministry. Now, when I first came to Chicago in 1975, knowing no one really except Pastor Owen Carr, who hired me, I set about the task of meeting other ministry leaders, particularly those in Chicago who were making exceptional contributions to the city. Many of those leaders became longtime friends who supported our television ministry from its earliest days. One of those leaders is pastor and media personality David Maines. When we met in the 70s, David was the founding pastor of Circle Church, which is a unique and ethnically diverse ministry in Chicago. David went on then to become the director of Chapel of the Air, a successful radio ministry. Then later, he moved into television on our network with the program You Need to Know. David has written over 40 books, collaborating with his wife Karen. He is currently on the board of directors of Gospel for Asia. We talked about the challenges of building our ministries, and in the 70s, for me, it was TV 38, and for David, it was Circle Church. David, thanks for taking time with me. I've been looking forward to this because you and I have known each other for so long.
Long time.
And we
Good
have
friends.
So many compatible memories that
Yes.
I always enjoy the times that we've been able to get together over the years.
I'm glad. They don't happen enough.
No, it really doesn't. Let's talk about the Circle Church era. When I first came to Chicago, you had just completed a book. I got a copy of the book.
Okay, that was Full
I read the
Circle.
book,
Yeah.
and immediately we got in contact with you because at that time there wasn't what we call the mega church. And
You're right. There were no mega churches. No, there were large churches, but not huge churches.
Yeah, there's also not a lot of experimentation, and yet you kind of struck out in a direction that was unusual for the evangelical church at the time, because the evangelical church is pretty contained. Talk about that.
We started Circle Church. Circle was named after the Circle Interchange, where all the expressways meet in the heart of the city. That's the Circle Exchange, and they built Chicago Circle campus, the University of Illinois there. Bus drivers call it Spaghetti Junction. And I was audacious enough that we should start a church right in the heart of Chicago where all those expressways meet. And that's why we called it Circle Church. There was nothing real theological about the name. It was more a geographical name.
Yeah.
I had felt strongly impelled of the Lord to come into the city. And to put it in context, Jerry, because I'm about 10 years ahead of you going into the city, because you came later with the television station. That was a time of the Cold War, was going on, and that was also the time of white flight. White flight was white congregations leaving the city to go to the suburbs, and there weren't any churches that were left. Sometimes the church buildings would be purchased by another racial group, but my wife and I said, so we're servants of the Lord, and we're stewards. We have skills, and I would think that he would say, I'd like to put you in a place where you could be significant, and we got to reverse that white flight trend. And so we started a church, and we called it Circle Church.
David, it was interesting because when we were first looking for a facility in Chicago, a pastor that I had befriended and became a very good friend of mine, Pastor Cal Markham of First Presbyterian Church in Aurora.
Yeah, he was very key to that whole ministry.
When we were looking, he said, look, let's take a trip to downtown Chicago. So we went downtown, and he began to show me churches, Presbyterian churches, old churches, mainline churches that had famous personalities, the Dole Pineapple family and so forth. Churches that were no longer relevant churches that really could have been bought very inexpensively, and beautiful, beautiful churches. And the reason was because there had been white flight, and the churches, the people who were left in the churches, were not really willing and really didn't want participation from the neighborhood. But he said all of these churches were designed for the neighborhood. There's not enough parking, there's not enough, so these are not suburban kind of churches.
Right.
And
all those problems, right.
there was not a lot of interest in diversity in those churches at that
That's correct.
time.
It was a different world.
You came along and said we need diversity.
Yeah, that was one of the great dreams. In fact, our staff eventually, I was there as a white minister. We had an African American minister. We had a Chinese Filipino. We had a woman on staff. So diversity was a big thing to us. We thought that the church ought to be a model of the kingdom, and that was very major to us. I also would say that I was not at all aware of how naive I was, Jerry. You know, I came in as an idealist. I thought we'd solve these problems that have been building for hundreds of years. You know, in a couple of months we'll knock those off and then we'll show people how this thing should be done. It was very, very difficult. And then,
Why was it so difficult?
I would say, if I make it personal, I would say it was because of my own unawareness of racism that was very much a part of who I was and how I had been raised. And I thought, you know, blacks should think the way I think, which they didn't. And Filipino, Chinese should think the way I think, which they don't. And it takes a long time and a whole lot of bumping against one another. And after that bumping, learning to love one another. The 9th year of our ministry, all the blacks left the church, which was a huge, crushing defeat to me. And I was the cause of a lot of that. You know, I was not the only cause, but it was very difficult to bring these diverse groups together.
Was there also a bumping together of cultures and an unwillingness for the cultures to adapt to each other?
Of course, that's a part of it. I think that these problems were incredibly deep-seated. And I came to realize the immensity of these problems. And I came to realize the people who have done huge works in these areas, how special they were. I was a part of that, and I'm glad for that heritage. I am not the man I used to be. I'd like to relive it all with the modulated personality. I am now. Would you like to relive something?
I've been here 40 years, and there are decisions and choices and things that I look at that I think, dear Lord, if I had just been smarter,
yeah,
if I had just done that differently,
sure,
if I had just understood, so I think we all have those situations, but that problem that you talk about, if anything, has gotten worse rather than better. I think that with all the political correctness today, that problem was worse even than it was in the 70s.
I don't know how to answer that, whether it is or not. In some ways, there are wonderful illustrations of people who are doing phenomenal work, and in other ways, you're aware. You know, I'm one of the great heartbreaks I have. I'm in a very good church. I love the church. I'm not the pastor. I'm just a parishioner in that church, but it's almost totally white. You know, that's a sad thing. And the truth is, almost all of the churches where I would go and feel comfortable, where I live in the suburbs myself now, most of them are white, or I was a member of a black congregation for 6 years. And all those years, my wife and I were the only white people who were members of that black congregation. So I'm aware of, you know, there are problems, and have we made progress? I think obviously we've made progress. We've got a black president, which is a huge difference in terms of our culture. Did that solve all the problems? President Obama would be the first person to say it didn't solve all the problems, but it's solving some of them. So we're making progress.
More of my conversation with David Maines, including what he sees as the most powerful way to spread the gospel. That's coming up next.
The church is stuck on this one direction lecture model. And I think it's one of the reasons the church is struggling today.
Welcome back. Today, pastor and media personality David Mange is my guest. David has been a friend and supporter since we began our television ministry some 40 years ago. In fact, today his son Joel works for us and was largely responsible for TLN's winning a Best Documentary Emmy Award this year for our film Inc. 180. We continue with what the cultural landscape was like when our ministry was first getting off the ground. What do you remember, David, about the 70s, the late 60s and 70s that you see different today?
You know, those were interesting years. You have the Vietnam War going on. You have the Kennedys being shot. Obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King being shot. I was in the city during those times. I remember the riots coming through the neighborhood. I was living in Lincoln Park in Chicago, and the windows being broken out and all that. So those were tumultuous years. 76 would have been the bicentennial. 1776 is the Declaration of Independence.
Memorial Day of 76.
So that was the 200th year anniversary. What a great day to be able to do the Memorial Day 200th bicentennial. That was the year the first Mayor Daley died in Chicago. He had been mayor for 21 years, so that was a huge shift in terms of the city.
When we had our dedication, we invited the mayor to speak at our dedication, and Eric Severide was scheduled to interview him on CBS, and he canceled the interview with CBS because he said, this is local. I want to participate local. And he spoke at our dedication.
Jerry, wow. You know, you say, what do I remember? You know, one of the things I remember, our church went very well. It grew quite large, and probably because of that, I was voted president of the Ministerial Association. And I was aware as the head of that it was very difficult to bring people together because they didn't have this common sense of identity. And one of the things that you did, in my mind, is you began to pull ministers together to see a bigger vision other than just their neighborhood. And that was a very beautiful thing. I don't know how much you're aware of yourself doing that, but you built ministerial groups and all the rest, which I think was a great contribution of your ministry that maybe you don't think about that much.
That was our goal. Well, it was interesting because I met Jay Kessler at the time.
Yeah, he was
Carroll Stream,
president of Youth for Christ.
President of Youth for Christ, and I met with Jay, and we had lunch together. And I asked him the question. I said, Jay, why on earth am I here? You know, I mean, I don't know anything about the Chicagoland area. I don't know anything about, all of the differences and so forth. And he looked at me and he said, I think that's the reason. He said, the Lord knew that anybody who knew the circumstances wouldn't dare take on this challenge. And I said, okay, I fit that bill.
Jay. Sounds like Jay. Well, in a way, he was right, though. Your naivete was a good thing. I don't think you were just naive about the church scene, Jerry. I think you were naive as to the immensity of what the Lord was calling you to do.
I think the experience was made easier because I met people like you.
I'm pleased.
Because we did have a lot of opposition. We had opposition in the press. At the beginning, we had opposition from the Jewish community. We had opposition from Wheaton College.
From Wheaton, wow, you're going so fast, though. You won the Jewish people over, if I'm not mistaken, in those early days. Is that not fair?
We did win the Jewish people over because I went to the ADL and I said, look, there's got to be a way we can work together. We're not against the Jews, and developed a strong relationship in the Jewish community. We didn't become Catholic, but we reached out to the Catholic community because they were 70-something% of the community.
Oh, yeah.
When Cardinal Bernardine died, I spent an entire day with people on the set talking about that, and we followed the funeral. And I got some criticism, but at the same time, we had a substantial influence within the Catholic context. When we got here, I said, how do we reach this community? It's a different community than I wanted.
But you were coming, Jerry, with a mindset that was different than what most of the mindsets were. Most of it was, what camp am I a part of? And that's the world I'll stay in. And I know I'm I'm uncomfortable once I get out of that camp. But that's not how you were. So again, you were unusual. You talk about the qualities other people may have had, but you had great qualities. That's special.
But you were unusual. I mean, and that I think that's part of what made us so compatible.
Yeah.
You were unusual.
Yeah.
You didn't think like a lot of in-the-box evangelicals. And even when you went to radio, you took over, I think, your uncle's program, Chapel of the Air. It was not stereotypical. It was different.
No, I began to say, how do we use this? How do I serve the church through this, rather than in some way compete with the church? And then we started different things like the 50-day spiritual adventure.
After Chapel of the Air, then you put a picture to it,
Yeah.
which when you went from radio to television, was that, and in fact, on TV 38,
Yeah, of course.
was that a pretty dramatic change?
I love that. I have to say thank you to you. I never would have done television had it not been for you. Radio was like trying to communicate with both your hands tied behind you, whereas television all of a sudden became wonderful to me. And I learned from you, and you were gracious in giving me opportunities. I think the happiest time in my ministry was when I was doing television in your studios. It's more difficult in some ways, more challenging, but at the same time has incredible opportunities. On radio, you may have a little trinket you picked up somewhere in the Near East and you're describing it and it takes you forever. But on television, you not only hold it up and they come in with a camera, everybody can see it. My personal feeling is that this is not a lecture culture. And when I say lecture, that's a synonym for preaching. People don't learn a whole lot by someone standing up and talking for 25 or 30 minutes. This is a visual culture, and it is a dialogue culture. You know, if you say to somebody, would you like to go and hear a lecture with me? The guy's going to talk for 45 minutes. You get kind of I'm not sure, you know. It's a visual culture. Do you want to see a movie? Sure, I'm interested in that. Do you want to watch a television program? All that. The whole learning process is different, but the church is stuck on this one direction lecture model. And I think it's one of the reasons the church is struggling today. I think that, you know, the new generation, you talk about the millennials or the generations that come following that group, they're dialogue people. They'll say, yeah, I'll sit down and we'll talk together. But this is an outmoded form of communication. The church is in this you can't get at us mode, which is not where the culture is. I think in America, the two ways people are influenced profoundly is one, by interview, and two, by storytelling. Storytelling is a major part of it. We lost the sexual wars, not because we didn't preach enough sermons on non-biblical sexual activity. We lost them because we didn't tell good stories. We had good stories to tell. We had all kinds of stories of, if you talk, Christian men who were tempted. And could have probably said, I could go down that road. However, I think I will choose not to because of these consequences. And those testimonies could have been very powerful, whether they're done in film form or whether the testimonies were given in church services. That as contrasted to saying the Bible says from a pulpit, authoritarian type of thing, would have been huge. We still don't use testimonies. And Jerry, my whole study in terms of my life has been revival. You know what opens up revival? It's almost always not preaching, it's testimony.
Stories do continue to work. David, thank you. I appreciate your friendship and all the years of friendship and what your encouragement has meant, and some times when I desperately needed encouragement.
Yeah, and congratulations. 40 years, that's wonderful. They've been good years. The Lord has been good. You've been a good representative of His kingdom. I'm proud of you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yeah, but you have many more years to come, huh?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Interesting observations from David on a revival. As we know, television is also a powerful way to communicate through both interviews and stories. Final thoughts from one of our past programmers right after this. Stay tuned.
This is one of my tough questions, okay? My tough question is, if you become one who is converted and is a follower now of Jesus, can you just ignore the church? And all of a sudden, all of your loving talk, I'm wondering what you're going to say.
Welcome back. You know, Jesus used all types of different communications methods to reach his audience. He preached, he asked and answered questions, and he told stories. For today's final thoughts, we're looking back at one of our past programs, David Main's You Need to Know.
This is one of my tough questions, okay? My tough question is, if you become one who is converted and is a follower now of Jesus, can you just ignore the church? And all of a sudden, all of your loving talk, I'm wondering what you're going to say.
Well, the church is Christ's body.
That's right.
If you're following Christ, he doesn't call us to be solo Christians. He calls us to be in community. We're going to spend eternity with the church, eternity together with people. And I think church is a dress rehearsal for what we're going to spend the rest of our lives doing. You can't turn your back on the church and be a follower of Jesus
But there
Christ.
are a lot of people who feel they are followers of Jesus Christ who have very little to do with the church. Am I right or not?
You're right.
Now,
You're
what
right.
would you say to them? They are not followers of Jesus?
I'd say read the book, because do what the book says.
Amen.
Followers follow Jesus.
You got a chorus of amens here.
This is a first with us together, isn't it?
Historically, as Father Douglas said earlier, the way the person becomes a Christian is through holy baptism. And baptism is something that's done by the church. You can't baptize yourself.
Introduction into the community. Exactly.
Right.
Which is introduction
Now I want
into
to
the
ask you,
family
can
of
I
God.
ask you about baptism? Because in our tradition, people are baptized after they, as you said, cross the line. You know, when you were baptized in 19... you know...
I was brought to Christ by a community of faith, my parents, who believed and claimed faith for me. You know, and
But you're
put
saying
me
you
into
could,
this.
you could choose to abandon that faith.
Oh, sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, but Doug was
Absolutely.
also, correct me if I'm wrong, you were confirmed.
Yes,
And
I was confirmed
confirmation
when I was in eighth
in
grade.
the early church, baptism and confirmation were a single event, and
And
it happened
Eucharist
to
as well.
and it happened to adults. But as Christians were martyred in the early centuries, including the children of Christians who had been baptized, the church began baptizing even infants, but then said they must make a profession of faith on their own when they reach the age of reason, which
Now,
is
they're
13.
all nodding, and you're holding your head straight, but you probably are nodding or wondering whether you should nod or what.
No, well, I can understand why that practice happened. I
Okay.
disagree with it.
Well, let me run to the end of it. So what happened was confirmation and baptism separated for what were at the time very good reasons. And
But
they
only in
remained
the Christian West, by the way.
only in the
And
Christian
still in
West.
Orthodoxy,
Right.
they're together.
We should hear about that in a second. They have come back together, and particularly with the beginning of the Anabaptists, they said, no, we should do all of this for people as adults. Ultimately, even the Episcopal Church and the Catholic Church, and you can talk about the Orthodox Church, would say there must be an adult profession of faith, which we call confirmation.
I appreciated the opportunity to talk with David Mains and have so much respect for what God's done in his life through the years. And, you know, as we look at the 40 years that I've been here and all of the years that David has been involved in ministry, there comes a time when it's time for another season. And the word retirement is one that I kind of struggle with because it means to kind of back off. And so many times when people do that, they kind of move to the sidelines and kind of watch the world go by. I don't think God intended for us to do that. I think God intends for every season of our life that we are productive for the kingdom of God, and for that matter for ourselves, that we're fulfilled. And in order to do that, one of the things that I see is taking those same gifts and talents that allowed us to be productive for those seasons of life we called a career time and so forth, and reapply those in other areas that can be a blessing to other people, can be productive for the kingdom of God, and can be fulfilling in our own lives. So instead of retirement, think about transition. It's a better way to go. Thanks for joining me. God bless. See you next time.